Hello, my name is Erin Whited, and this is my documentary video on romanticism in music. The term romantic is derived from the ideal romance, a poem or story about heroic events or persons. It connects people to something different and fantastic, and opens your mind to an imaginary world that takes you away from your everyday reality. Defined not only as a term to describe the focus of individuality, melody, and emotion in the arts, Romanticism became a word used to describe the time period that we now call the Romantic era in the 18th and 19th centuries. Romanticism, in a nutshell, was the reaction of a society being dramatically impacted by the rapidly changing forces of science and technology. Romantics began to identify themselves as those who found refuge in a dreamlike state, the mythical or supernatural, if you will. People began crowding into cities thanks to the great forms of industrialization, and romantics were those who were left behind in the cities, who left the cities to find their peace in rural life. Composers were inspired to seek out ways of expressing intense emotions such as joy, longing, heartache, still respecting the traditional form of music writing and harmonies indicative of the classical era, which was right before the Romantic era. Composers began to explore and essentially break all the rules of music typical to the previous era. E.T.A. Hoffmann and other literature writers began to consider instrumental music the ideal romantic art, simply because it was free from the confines of words and visual images, so it could then cause people to think, respond, and feel things that are beyond the power that words can express. Some important composers who are described as Romantic era composers includes Franz Schubert, Robert and Clara Schumann, who were both very profound on their own in their own music era and then got married. Felix Mendelssohn, Frederick Chopin, Franz Liszt, and Louis Moreau Gottschalk. One form of music prominent of the era is the Romantic Lied. Compromised as a fusion of music and poetry and centered around expressing individual feelings was the German Lied or Lieder. These German songs grew tremendously in popularity in the 19th century, with about one being published per month in the late 1700s to over 100 per month in 1826. Known for his quantity of Lieder production is composer Franz Schubert. He was respected as a composer for always being able to shape the music to fit the lyric and meaning behind the text. Though he never secured a permanent salaried position, a real job, he was a freelance composer who received substantial funds from his publishers as his music was being performed all over the Vienna. Another set of composers known for their mark on the Romantic era are the Schumanns. Both Robert and Clara were independently fantastic musicians. They became what is known today as one of the most significant marriages in the history of music. Talk about a power couple. Though he was known for many things such as his piano music, symphonies, and chamber music, his oboe music, which I'm very familiar. I'm an oboe player myself, and I love Robert Schumann's pieces. He also wrote over 120 songs in what he called the Year of the Song in 1840. Many of these works were love songs, not simply because of the era, but also his marriage to Clara Wieck, soon to become Clara. Orchestral, chamber, and choral music were all affected by the Romantic period, each experiencing its own growth and expansions. A composer that impacted the orchestral side is Hector Berlioz, with his Symphonie Fantastique. Which utilizes a new musical device called the idée fixe, a fixed idea or obsession with melody or work that is often repeated through the piece, which is characteristic of Romantic music. Music for religious services was also greatly impacted. Catholics, Protestants, Reformed Judaism, and Russian Orthodox all alike were all evolved some way through the new notation of shape note singing and the rise of new a cappella music as unaccompanied choral music. And this shape note singing, there's an example below, is very common in our Western Protestant church hymnals that you'll see a lot of times in Methodist or Baptist churches. You will see the shape note form of notation in those hymns. Also impacted by the music of the Romantic era are the mythological topics believed and shared during the Romantic period. In the story of Prometheus, a mythological titan, Prometheus earns himself a spot in the center of European theater goers' hearts as a rebel and liberator. This was powerful as it paralleled with European moves of revolution and nationalism in the late 19th century. The musical scores and compositions of Beethoven and Liszt during this time parallels musical expression and ideas to that of the theater, both of which were not characteristic of the classical normal of that era. This was a reform that the Romantic era brought on both musical composers and critics of the theater. In many journals of musicology, the idea is presented about how musical expression can affect the ethos of our human emotions as the listener, compared to how the composer meant for the listener to feel. Theories of this concept are based primarily around Germanic music of the late 18th century and labeled as classical romantic. Thematic transformations along with pitch and rhythm all demonstrate characteristics of romanticism in a listener, therefore classifying them as romantic-era music. Beethoven was a master of eliciting musical behavior that commands an emotional response in his audiences of the late 19th century, some of which he didn't intend. The ability of a composer to make a listener feel a certain way using music theory and composition is amazing to me, because a lot of times those are things that not everybody, you put a piece of music in front of somebody, you may not be able to read it or play an instrument, and performers are able to take that was written by somebody, that came out of somebody's genius mind on a piece of paper, and they're able to perform it and make you feel a certain way. Most of the time the way they intend you to, but sometimes not. But it was during the Romantic era that composers really began to take advantage of these concepts in their writings to captivate and control the ethos of their audiences. And that's why I chose this topic, because it impacts me a lot, because my primary instrument being the oboe, I play a lot of Romantic era music. A lot of it was written for the oboe because it was of that time period. It was a very popular instrument, and it's just beautiful pieces that as a performer I'm able to express and to make other people feel without words, without singing, lyric, or even eye contact, really. And so I chose Romantic era because that was a very progressive time for music. Thank you.